Welcome everyone to this week's Big 12 preview and predictions. We're in week 7 of the college football season. Got some big boys in the Big 12 this week, highlighted by Oklahoma, Texas, and Dallas, a game that's lost a little bit of its luster, but still a highly important game, especially for the Texas Longhorns. We'll also talk about Texas Tech and their trip to Nebraska. But first, we're going to look at some of the games with non-ranked opponents. We'll start in Ames, Iowa. Baylor visits Iowa State. Last week, Iowa State got into an offensive shootout against KU. Almost pulled that game out. A pass fell just over a wide receiver in the end zone that could have actually upset the Jayhawks. They drilled KU's defense for 512 yards. It's time to admit that Tom Herman's system has been implemented quicker than I thought at Iowa State. This offense is good, they're extremely balanced, and they're going to create problems for other teams. They fell by the long pass, however, defensively last week. Todd Reesing was able to throw for 442 yards. Baylor, on the other hand, they held their own against Oklahoma. That's a 14-7 game at the half, remember. The killer for them, only 6 yards of rushing on the ground, really kept their offense one-dimensional and let OU pull away and win that game 33-7. Iowa State has a more balanced offense. You saw last week, 293 yards passing, 219 yards on the ground. I think Austin Arnaud and this offense are going to keep Baylor off balance. They have a good defense, but I think ultimately Baylor's going to be a little bit one-dimensional. I fear that their running game is not going to get going offensively. Look for Iowa State and Austin Arnaud to keep Baylor off balance and win this football game in Ames. Next game on our list, Kansas State welcomes Texas A&M, and I'll be the first to admit I put way too much faith in Kansas State last week at Texas Tech. And the key question for them, can they mentally recover from a 739-yard drubbing they took at the hands of the Red Raiders? The QB situation obviously going to be up in the air again this week in Manhattan. You saw Grant Gregory have a whole bunch of problems against Texas Tech. Bill Snyder installed Carson Kaufman towards the later stages of that game. Who starts this week? Your guess is as good as mine. But the running back, I think, is the key for Kansas State. Daniel Thomas was absolutely shut down by Texas Tech's defense. If he is not able to spur that Wildcat running game, they're going to be in trouble again against Texas A&M. You watched Keith Totson from Oklahoma State absolutely kill A&M last week and be the deciding factor in that game. I think ultimately, though, A&M, Gerard Johnson, they're going to try to control the pace of the game, and they're going to try to show an explosive offense that we saw during some of the non-conference season. I think the confidence is going to be the issue for K-State. If they can recover from that, they keep this game close. But ultimately, I look for Gerard Johnson and them. They gain confidence despite a loss to Oklahoma State last week. I think they have a balanced attack and an explosive attack, and they beat Kansas State in Manhattan. Undefeated Kansas is going to visit Colorado this week, a place where they've historically struggled. KU proved last week they can outscore people. Problem, however, their defense got shredded by Iowa State. Iowa State had a chance to win that ball game in the final moments, but ultimately against the Buffaloes, they just have a better skill package. We've talked about these players all year. Opurum, Reesing, Meyer, Briscoe, they're going to do a good job. They're going to score a lot of points. Colorado cannot match them offensively is what I fear in that. But Kansas cannot let Colorado hang around. You watch the Buffaloes hang around tough against Texas last week before special teams and costly turnovers eventually cost them that game. They're going to have a new quarterback. Tyler Hansen is going to be the new man in Colorado. Cody Hawkins, benched by his dad, Dan Hawkins. But here's the problem I have with Tyler Hansen. He's been very vocal over the last 2 years of his willingness to redshirt and, quite frankly, want to redshirt. This will be the second year in a row that they're going to pull that redshirt and force him into action. His attitude and willingness to play is going to come into question Saturday, and to see how he can lead the Buffalo offense against KU. Here's the problem. 127 yards of offense last week against Texas. Not going to cut it. You're not going to outscore KU. And ultimately, I think that's probably going to cost Colorado. KU way too much firepower. They go to Boulder and they win that game. One of the underrated games, I think, in the conference this week, Missouri 4-1 at 4-1 Oklahoma State. Last week, a little bit different story on both teams. Oklahoma State goes to College Station, gets a big win over Texas A&M, and Missouri, they have a really rough, tough game against Nebraska, get exposed in a lot of ways, and drop out of the North Divisional race for the moment. Oklahoma State, obviously, after we went to air last week, Des Bryant suspended by the NCAA, meeting with him again this week, his status up in the air, but most likely will be suspended. Oklahoma State did okay without him, though, last week. You saw Keith Totson have a good game. Hubert Enium, good wide receiver for Oklahoma State, stepped up, helped them out, let their offense be balanced. Zach Robinson made plays. Missouri, on the other hand, they got exposed by Nebraska, like I said earlier. Here's the key to it. If you get pressure on Blaine Gabbert, he doesn't respond well. You saw it last week. Nebraska's defensive line harassed him the whole game, caused turnovers, and shut them down late. They couldn't do anything offensively, and Nebraska was able to put that game away in the fourth quarter. 134 yards passing for Gabbert, 2 interceptions, no touchdowns. Look for Keith Totson and the Oklahoma State running game to control the tempo of the game. Keep Missouri off balance. Let Zach Robinson make plays with his feet and through the air. I think Oklahoma State moves to 5-1 on the year behind a big rushing performance from Keith Totson. Now on to the big one in Dallas, Oklahoma, Texas, a game people circled before the year as being one of the top games possibly in conference history. Obviously, they've lost some flair from that, with OU suffering 2 early season losses in the wake of Sam Bradford's injury. Neither team did a whole bunch last week to build momentum coming into this game. Oklahoma, with Bradford back, struggled in the red zone. A lot of drop passes in the end zone, had to get 4 field goals from Jimmy Stevens to eventually pull away from Baylor and win 33-7. Texas struggled mightily against Colorado. The Buffaloes led for the majority of the first half, had to get bailed out by their special teams in Jordan Shipley and defensive touchdowns once again. I think the key matchup this week, the Texas running game versus the Oklahoma defense. You watched OU limit Baylor to 6 yards rushing last week, shut them down. On the other hand, Colorado was able to limit Texas to 46 yards running on the ground after they've been absolutely shredded earlier in the year by running attacks. Trey Newton and Vondrell McGee. Question marks at running back for Texas. They're going to be day-to-day. Their status for Saturday unknown. Obviously, Texas has other talented running backs, but still, that's a lot of question marks in the running game, and it's going to put pressure on their captain, Colt McCoy. He's going to have to not have a shaky start this week like he has in other games. OU is going to try to put pressure on him early, shut down the Texas running game, and see if McCoy will make a key mistake. In games like this with 2 talented teams, that's what it could come down to. Sam Bradford for Oklahoma is going to be better. They're going to get some things worked out this week. If Texas gets off to a slow start and gives Oklahoma's defense some momentum, Sam Bradford's good enough to make plays. You've seen him do it, and this game's going to get real interesting in a hurry. For Oklahoma, the key, they cannot get burnt by Texas's special teams. You watched last year, Jordan Shipley hurt them with a kickoff return for a touchdown. Shipley has done it consistently this year. Texas Tech fans saw it. Last week, Colorado fans saw it. That's how Texas has gotten themselves out of trouble. OU has to shut that aspect of the game down to keep this one close. Ultimately, I think here's what it comes down to. You saw Mack Brown in Texas this week jokingly a little bit upset about being dropped to number 3 in one of the polls below Florida and Alabama. I think they're going to have a lot more to worry about after this week. Quite frankly, I think Texas is overrated, and they're going to run into trouble in Dallas. Oklahoma's going to win this game, derail Texas's national title hopes for the moment. Last game we're going to look at, Texas Tech visits Lincoln to take on the Nebraska Cornhuskers in what I think is going to be a highly entertaining game. The quarterback situation for Texas Tech might be up in the air if you listen to Mike Leach. Let's be honest with ourselves. Steven Sheffield has to be Tech's starting quarterback, and here's why. Nebraska's defensive line is too good. You watched last week, they took a pocket passer like Blaine Gabbert and caused him all kinds of problems. And Ndamukong Suh was all over him. They caused turnovers, and Texas Tech cannot afford that. Sheffield's ability to run and create secondary opportunities is going to be absolutely key in this game. Because if Tech's quarterback stays put, the offensive line is not going to hold Nebraska for that long. And Ndamukong Suh will greatly increase his draft stock if Tech tries to stay in the pocket against a really good Nebraska defensive line. When Sheffield scrambles, Tech has too many receivers to account to. You saw it happen last week against Kansas State. You have him accounted for initially. He scrambles, somebody's open, and you get burnt on a big play. You watch Tyrod Taylor from Virginia Tech do precisely that to Nebraska in the Cornhuskers' only loss earlier this year. From a defensive standpoint for Texas Tech, you watched them shut down a very good running back last week in Daniel Thomas from Kansas State. Nebraska has a good one. Roy Halu Jr. was able to neutralize Missouri late in that game last week and open up a lot of things for the Cornhusker offense. But, like I said, Tech shut down Daniel Thomas last week. I think they're capable of doing the same against Halu Jr. Zach Lee, quarterback for Nebraska, got off to an extremely slow start at Missouri. He exploded for 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter, but to be quite honest with you, if he gets off to that slow start against Texas Tech, they're going to be in too big of a hole to dig out. After 66 points and 700 yards of offense, I'm just not at this point going to doubt Texas Tech's ability. I don't think they're going to have that big a drop-off in Lincoln, and I think a Sheffield-led offense is going to cause Nebraska a whole bunch of problems. If Tech's offensive line can temporarily slow down Ndamukong Suh in that Nebraska line, Sheffield keeps rolling, and Texas Tech goes to Lincoln and upsets Nebraska. Nebraska's offense is going to have to show explosiveness to keep up with Texas Tech. I just have my doubts at this point. I'm going to call it right now. I think Texas Tech goes to Lincoln, upsets Nebraska to move to 5-2 on the season. That's going to wrap up our look at this week's Big 12 Conference slate. For the Lubbock Avalanche-Journal, I'm Zach Long.